It's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Kaya Henderson. Kaya served as the Chancellor of DC Public Schools from 2010 to 2016. And under her leadership, the district became the fastest improving urban school system in the country. Her tenure was marked by consecutive years of enrollment growth and the highest graduation rates in the history of the district, improvements in student satisfaction and teacher retention, increases in AP participation and pass rates, and the greatest growth of any urban district on the National Assessment of Educational Progress over multiple years. She began as the Deputy Chancellor in 2007, overseeing the district's human resources and human capital work. And in this position, she served as the chief negotiator for the groundbreaking contract between DCPS and the Washington Teachers Union that led to the development of Impact, a new and innovative professional development and assessment system designed to ensure that effective teachers were leading every classroom in DCPS. Her work in developing human capital at DCPS has served as a model for other school districts around the country. She began her career as a middle school Spanish teacher in the South Bronx through Teach for America. And just as I shared with you yesterday how I chose Fernando, I've been stalking Kaya for years. She didn't respond to the emails, but she was at a meeting where Deputy Executive Director Fred Brown and President-elect Alan Ingram were, and I said to them they needed to corner her and convince her that she should come keynote for Learning Forward. So as a result of that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Kaya Henderson.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. As Stephanie said, this has been a long time in the making. They've been after me for a little bit to come and share. And honestly, I was like, well, I don't really have a lot to share, and I'm sure they'll find somebody more spectacular, and they have for years and years. And then Alan and Fred kind of tackled me at a meeting, and here I am. So I want to say thank you to Learning Forward's persistence in getting me here, and for giving me the coveted after lunch spot, right? The spot when everybody is so energized and excited, having just had pasta. They were like, the thing is gonna be pasta. I was like, really? Pasta? But we're gonna power through that and hopefully have a conversation where I can just spend a few minutes sharing with you a little bit about the work that we were able to accomplish at DC Public Schools over the last 10 years. Right before I came into this room, I had the pleasure of having a kind of intimate conversation with about 12 colleagues who came out, and we talked about a lot of different things. And I talked with them about the importance of authentic leadership and really being yourself. And they asked some really important questions, and we had a good dialogue. And as we left that room, I said to Michelle, my handler, you know, I really enjoy that kind of question and answer interaction far more than I enjoy giving a keynote speech. And so at some keynotes, I'm known to completely and totally depart from my remarks and just start having a conversation. And she said, well, that would be great. And I said, really? She said, yeah. And so I thought to myself, more than reading you a speech that I've delivered in lots of places, I would much rather just kind of speak from the heart about what has happened in DC Public Schools, what the implications are for professional learning, and sort of why I think gatherings like this are maybe the most important things happening in the country as far as educational transformation is concerned. Is that okay? Well, that would be better than you falling asleep when I listening to a speech. So I'm going to start with the conversation that we had in the other room, where one of my colleagues asked, What legacy do you want to be remembered for, Kaya? And I thought it was a great question. As you heard from Stephanie, we accomplished a lot of really important things in DC public schools. Graduation rates up, test scores up, enrollment up, teacher retention, keeping 92% of our highest performing teachers, student engagement and satisfaction is up, a whole host of things that any superintendent and any group of educators would be really proud of. But when I think about the 10 years that I spent in leadership at DC Public Schools, there are two things that I really, really want to be remembered for. The first is I want to be remembered for restoring a city's faith in its public school system. When I got to DC Public Schools in 2007, we had the dubious reputation for being known as the lowest performing urban school district in the country, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. We were a district that was seeing 40 consecutive years of declining enrollment. Literally, every single year that people could get out, they would get out. First, out to the suburbs, and then to charter schools, which were growing more rapidly and more rapidly every year. We were a district that was not only bleeding students, but we were bleeding teachers. We were bleeding principals. We had incredible turnover rates. And we were literally in a death spiral. The city had given up on its public schools. And I think now more than ever before, the role of public schools in America is absolutely critical. And what we were able to do over the course of 10 years was to rebuild this school district and get parents and families to come back to the traditional public school system. We think it's amazing that they have choices, that they get to go to charters, that they get to go to private schools, that they get to go to the traditional public school system. But in a country where 95% of students are still in traditional public schools, it was important for me as an African-American woman, who is the product of public schools, as a woman who was a mother and a citizen of our nation's capital, to show this country what a traditional public school system could do. And over the course of those 10 years, it was bumpy. We had a lot of friction. We had a lot of change to make. But we restored the city's faith in DC public schools. We now see people competing to get into DC public schools, cheating on their residency, in fact, to come to DC public schools. That was never the case before. People were cheating to get out of DCPS. And so I'm really proud that I was part of a team that was able to restore the city's faith in its public schools by producing tremendous results for kids and families. The second thing that I want to be remembered for as far as my legacy is concerned is the way we did that. We didn't do it by remediating children to death. We didn't do it by drilling and killing English and math. In fact, we did it by treating our students at DCPS, from the richest parts of the city to the poorest parts of the city, like they were the most gifted students in America. We treated them as if we were in Beverly Hills 90210 and our job was to give them the most amazing education possible. Not just English and math, but social studies and science and art and music and PE and foreign language and library and technology and international trips and anything else that you would give the most amazing kids, the things that you would give your own kids. That's the way we did it. That's the way we turned around a failing public school system. And I want that to be my legacy because in this day and age, we think if we just sit kids in front of a computer, if we give them a standardized test at the end, if we remediate them to death, that they will produce the kind of results that we want. We know that that's not right. That's not why any of us came into this profession. We came into this profession because we want to inspire greatness. And that's the work that we have to remember to do every single day, no matter what the federal government says, no matter what state mandates say, no matter what your school district or your principal say. Every single day, your job is to find that inspiration and deliver to the young people in front of you the kind of education that you would want for your own children. And so I stand here really proudly today to say that the schools in Washington, D.C. are not where we want them to be. We have incredible achievement gaps. We still have a lot of work to do in special education. But they're on a path to success that they haven't been on in decades. And for that, I'm really, really proud. That was the work. You can clap for that. That was the work because that was my experience as a public school student in Mount Vernon, New York. I grew up in the public schools of Mount Vernon. My family was low income. We lived in the projects of Mount Vernon for 47 years. And we moved solidly from a low income family into a middle and then upper class family because of the power of public education. My mother was the first person in our family to go to college. She became a teacher. And that changed everything for us. It changed absolutely everything for us. She became also then the first person in our family to buy a home, the first person in our family to travel internationally. The public schools gave her a great education, changed her life, and the public schools gave me a great education and changed my life. I went off to Georgetown University, where I majored in international relations, but while my friends were going off to Asia and Latin America and Africa to help other people, I felt like there were lots of people here in the United States who needed help, and our obligation was to them first. And so when I thought about domestic issues that I could possibly take on with this trusty new degree from Georgetown, really the most compelling policy issue in the United States to me was education. It's not that healthcare is not important. It's not that transportation is not important. It's not that infrastructure is not important. It's not that jobs are not important. All of those things are important. But I had lived the transformational experience that a great public education could provide to young people in America. That's the promise of the United States of America. And I wanted to be part of doing that here for our own folks. And so I began my educational journey after Georgetown through Teach for America, where at the time there was no other way for me to enter the education profession. And I taught middle school Spanish in the South Bronx, which was the most transformative experience of my life. I taught about 4 miles from where I grew up. But I grew up in Westchester County, which is a very affluent place, and the South Bronx is arguably one of the poorest communities in America. And I watched kids who were as talented and as bright as me or any of my colleagues growing up, but who didn't have the same quality of teaching. They didn't have the same academic materials. They didn't have people advocating for them. They didn't have exposure, despite the fact that we lived in New York City, and a $1.25 subway ride could take you anywhere. My kids were lacking tremendously. But, as Commissioner Stewart reminded us, the single most important in-school factor to producing awesome results for students is the quality of the teacher. And so while I didn't have a traditional educational background, and while I struggled mightily over the course of my 2 years teaching to provide my young people with an extraordinary Spanish education, I learned enough to know that my life's mission would be getting great teachers into the classrooms that needed them most. I didn't know Dr. Dassler, but we might be spirit animals. You walk into a classroom and you see what happens with the most difficult kids, the most disengaged kids, and the most talented kids when they get an awesome teacher. And so I left the classroom and I went to colleges and universities all over the country telling young people that they needed to teach for America, that we needed their talent and their skills. And I left that and became the National Director of Admissions at Teach for America, where I oversaw all of our efforts to recruit and select teachers for school districts all across the country. And I left that after a while and I ran the DC office of Teach for America, where I first fell in love with DC public schools. And after doing that for some time, went on to work at TNTP, which my colleague just referenced, where I got to work with school districts all over the country to help them think about how to create systems for getting and keeping great teachers. And all of that sort of unlikely and non-traditional path landed me in DC Public Schools as the Deputy Chancellor for Human Capital. And when my prior boss, Michelle Rhee, was appointed Chancellor of DC Public Schools, she asked me, would I come and serve as her Deputy Chancellor? And I said, sure. I had been dying to get my hands on the keys to the castle, right? As a consultant, you are suggesting to your client what they should do, you're cajoling them, you're encouraging them, you're showing them data to act differently. But when you're in charge, and you have the budget, and you have the management authority, and you have all of the keys to the castle, you can make real change happen. And so we came into DCPS in 2007, as I said, one of the lowest performing districts in the country. And we were tasked with making change. And I did that for 3.5 years, and in 2010 I was asked to become the Chancellor of DC Public Schools when Michelle left. I share my educational journey because it was an unlikely journey. I didn't follow the traditional pathway from teacher to principal to central office person with the requisite stop in a doctoral program and then on to the superintendency. And that's a word of encouragement for all of you who want to be superintendents who have not followed a traditional pathway. It can happen. But I think, in fact, that unlikely pathway made me an incredibly different kind of leader than most of my superintendent colleagues. Not better, just different. In fact, because I wasn't an expert, really, on anything educational besides human capital, I mean, I had some skills that were pretty important. I'd learned how to raise money over time. I'd learned how to manage people really, really well. I'd learned how to produce results. I learned a lot of things that were really important for the superintendency. But I think the most important thing that I've learned along the way, and the thing that my unlikely superintendency taught me, was the power of relationships. Relationships make the world go round. And in fact, because I wasn't an expert in academics, curriculum, because I wasn't an expert in transportation or food services, because I wasn't an expert in any of the things that are important in a school district, I had to rely on other people. And that reliance on other people opened up a completely different way of working. And so I want to talk a little bit about relationships and how relationships led to the transformation of DC Public Schools. Every single day, each of you is building, fostering relationships with each other. You came into teaching because you wanted to build relationships with students, right? And in this day and age, unfortunately, we've moved away from the importance of the teacher-student relationship. I'm challenging you to find that thing again. That's the most important part of the enterprise of teaching. When we got to DC Public Schools, we had one theory of action, and that was get, grow, and keep great people. If we had amazing teachers, if we had awesome principals, if we had great central office staff, we believed that we could do anything. But shortly after arriving, after spending the first 3 years just getting the trains to operate on time, we literally figured out that just getting and keeping and growing great people wasn't enough. We spent a lot of time when we first got there just listening to teachers, listening to students, listening to parents, listening to community members about what they wanted for DC Public Schools. I say all the time, these are not my schools. I don't get to set the agenda. These are our schools, and so we are going to decide what we're going to do to turn this place around. And the first thing that I did when I became chancellor was listen. I did 140 listening sessions with teachers all over the district. I wanted them to know that they weren't there to serve me, that I was there to serve them. I asked them what they wanted. I spent time with them in their classrooms and outside of their classrooms. I created a teacher cabinet so that I got to be in conversation with them regularly. I built relationships with my teachers in the same way that we expect teachers to build relationships with their students. And so, as a result of those relationships, teachers told me what they want. You know, when the superintendent is in the room and asks you what you want, the first time people are like, oh, you know, we're good. And you say, no, really, right? I know that we need to change. I know we want to support you. And they're like, well, blah, 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 blah. And there's a zillion things that they want. And originally, it's interesting because at first, when we got there in 2007 and started asking teachers what they needed, teachers said to us, look, the standards say this. I think I'm teaching towards the standards, but I don't really know. We have these interim assessments that measure this and that and the other, and I don't know if those are aligned with what the standards are doing. The summative assessment doesn't seem to capture any of the things on the interim. Oh, and we don't have a curriculum, right? We don't have a standardized curriculum across the district, so I'm just kind of teaching whatever I think is right, and I don't know it's right. So can you just tell us how you want us to teach? That's what teachers asked us in the beginning. And so we said, if that's what our teachers need, then that's what we'll give them. And we created what we call the Teaching and Learning Framework, which lays out what great instruction looks like. And we said to our teachers, this is what we want you to be doing. It's based on evidence and best practices and research. This is what we want you to be doing. And teachers said, great. And we said, and we're going to evaluate you on this. And teachers said, not great. And we said, maybe not ideal, but here's what is also not ideal. It's not ideal to think about rolling out a system where we tell people how they are doing against our goals over 4 or 5 years. And here's the reason why. At the time, I was the mom of a 9th grader in DC Public Schools. And as my teachers proposed it to me, we would lay out the teaching and learning framework in year 1. In year 2, give people time to be observed against it and get some feedback. In year 3, be observed against it and get some feedback. And then in year 4, we'd start holding people accountable. And what I said to my teachers is, as a mom, that's not acceptable to me. Because what you're telling me is that my 9th grader will be graduating by the time I'm able to do anything with the information that we're learning from this. And my teacher said, okay, that's reasonable, because we were in relationship. And when you're in relationship with people, you can actually have the tough conversations. We want X. Let me tell you why X is not tenable. Okay, they'll meet me in the middle. And so we rolled out this educator evaluation system, and it was really important for people to understand what the expectations were and where they were against the expectations. But more than that, and people will tell you all kinds of things about impact and how terrible it is. And the newspapers, it was sensational. The newspapers covered it. We fired teachers and we fired principals all because of impact, and everybody now is being rated on their test scores. Not true. Impact is a system that has lots of different complicated parts to it. And the news cycle takes the bits and bytes that it wants and tells you what it wants. It doesn't tell you that only 13% of our teachers are in tested grades or subject areas. It doesn't tell you that we measure people on multiple examples of student achievement. It doesn't tell you that teachers co-create the goals that they set and are held accountable to. It doesn't tell you about all of the other pieces of the puzzle. But what we do know for sure is that as a result of impact, we were able to radically improve our teaching force. People talk about the teachers we fired. We fired this many teachers in the largest scheme of things. The real thing that Impact allowed us to do was it allowed us to recognize and reward our highest performers, which I'm really proud of, in an industry where when people do amazing jobs, we tell them, great, come to a picnic with your kids in the park. We don't actually pay them what they deserve to be paid. We don't appropriately value them and reward them and recognize them the way they do. Impact allowed us to do that, to figure out who were breaking the mold. And also, Impact allowed us to help people grow. In fact, a report by Stanford and UVA told us that the most important thing that Impact did was it helped us grow our teachers. That in fact, we were able to then customize our professional development to meet the needs of our teachers. We knew who was struggling and what. And so instead of a bunch of drive-by workshops by any old body, where anybody got to choose whatever they wanted to, we were able to prescribe to people ways that they could get better. We were able to tailor workshops and sessions to what our teachers were really struggling with. We were able to point out other people in the district who were excellent at things that other people were growing in. And we were able to make that connection and build those relationships. And so Impact became a really important cornerstone of the work that we did. Further, teachers then said, okay, Impact, we got it. We know how you want us to teach, but let's talk about what we are teaching. In fact, we started by just getting great people, telling them what we wanted. But then those great people said, we need some tools and resources to be effective. We need a curriculum. And not only do we need a really good curriculum, but we need time to learn that curriculum so that we can appropriately deliver it to our young people. And so, being responsive to the teachers that we were in relationship with, we created a curriculum. Pre-K through 12th grade, every single subject area aligned to the Common Core reading, writing, and math standards. And the question that we asked ourselves is much like the one that Dr. Dassler asked. Not how can we have a teacher that was as good as or better than anyone that we have, but how could we create lessons that were better than your most memorable lesson? You know the peanut butter and jelly lesson, where you learn how to make a peanut butter sandwich and you're following directions, peanut butter, and jelly, right? Those kinds of lessons that you remember even now as a 47-year-old, right? How could every lesson in DC public schools be that amazing? How could we ensure that our lessons were project-based, that they were integrated and cross-disciplinary? Nobody learns anything in a vacuum. Social studies is not just social studies, right? It's connected to math, it's connected to science, it's connected to English. How do we build a curriculum that in fact brings learning to life, not just for students, but for our teachers? And how do we make sure that our teachers, who we've been asking to do one thing one way, get the kind of support that they need to do something completely different? And so how did we figure out how to do it? We went to our teachers. In fact, we went to our best teachers because, you can clap, we went to our best teachers because we knew who our best teachers were, right? We have this impact system that helps us identify our highest performers. And we went to them and said, look, we want to build curriculum. And there are experts out there, who could help us, but we actually believe that there are experts in here who can design things for our community, for our group of teachers. And we we raised some money from some philanthropic organizations, and so I want to tip my hat to the Gates Foundation and a few other people who really believed in the curricular work that we did. And we used that money to pay our teachers to develop curriculum, not to buy it off the shelf from some big company, no disrespect to big companies that develop curriculum, but we trusted our teachers, and we believed that in fact, by relying on their expertise, we could get to those amazing lessons. And within 3 years, we had created not just a soup to nuts curriculum, but awesome lessons that were integrated and project-based, that were developed by our teachers for our teachers, and that literally were the thing that got us to these amazing test score gains. Not because we were studying the test, not because we were looking at testing blueprints and trying to figure out how to model all of our classroom lessons the way they would show up on the test. In fact, I think one of the best things that could have happened to us was that we were transitioning to the park. We had no idea what it would look like. And we stopped worrying about it. We decided to just teach our tails off. And what we know is if you're teaching good content, right, that the results will show up. And so we relied on our teachers to teach good content, but not just the curriculum. We had to teach people the content. We had to build time in so that our teachers got to master the content. We have people teaching math who haven't mastered math concepts, right? Real talk. You could say their universities should have done better or all of that jazz, but they are in my classrooms right now. And it's my obligation not to debate how they got here, but to get them ready to do the work that we're asking them to do. And so we created a program called LEAP. The acronym doesn't really work out so good. It's something like learning together to advance our practice. That's it. Learning together, L-E, learning together, learning together to advance our practice. LEAP. You know how these things go. But the interesting thing about LEAP is that it forced us to completely and totally rethink professional learning in DC public schools, right? Instead of thinking about workshops, instead of thinking about PD days, instead of thinking about grouping folks, K to 3, English and social studies, we decided to make the real hard investment of building a system where every single teacher is getting exactly what they need. What does that look like? Looks like professional learning communities, small professional learning communities where if you're a third grade English teacher, you're with other third grade English teachers, not third, fourth, and fifth, or first, second, and third grade English teachers. The third grade math teachers are somewhere else, the third grade science teachers are somewhere else. And what you're getting is time. You're in a 90-minute seminar every week with your colleagues where you get to plan together, where you actually get, with a content lead, to dig deep into the content. It's where the third grade math teacher can say, I don't know, I haven't mastered that thing just yet. And we actually work on teaching teachers the content so that they can provide the content to students. And what our teachers have said to us is this kind of professional development, these seminars that happen weekly, observations where your content lead is in your classroom giving you feedback, not in an evaluative way, but in a progressive, productive way, and then debriefs where you're thinking about looking at student work to see whether or not you hit the mark and developing reteach plans. Again, with your colleagues using the content, it has revolutionized the work in DC public schools because we were in relationship with our teachers. When I think about professional learning, I think that we are at a crossroads in this country. We are clear that the professional learning of yesterday is not going to get us to where we need to go tomorrow. We are fighting on all fronts to keep the kinds of resources that are necessary to do the kind of professional learning that our educators deserve as professionals. And all the while, things are changing rapidly, right underneath our feet. I think that it's an interesting time. Sometimes in the most embattled times, those are the times for growth. Those are the times to be completely creative and to come up with something new. Those are the times when you get the most inspiration. And so I'm bullish on professional learning, even though some of you might feel under siege. I'm bullish on professional learning because ultimately, I think that it is the thing that drives student achievement results. As I said, the teacher is the most important in-school factor for student achievement. And you don't change what's happening with teachers unless you are expert at executing professional learning. And I think that the demands of the time, I would say to my people all the time, right, as a school district, we are in the people development business. Make no mistake about it. We are in the people development business. We take little people and prepare them to be ready big people. But we also take big people, right, and develop them into better, more effective big people. Both are equal parts of our work. And if we aren't the absolute best teacher development organization in the country, then we're never going to see the kinds of results for kids that we want to see. And I think that districts, schools, states get that. I think that they recognize that the work is not transporting students. There are people who are experts in that kind of stuff. Feeding students, people are experts in that kind of stuff. In fact, I pushed all of those things aside, sent them to other people who were experts in that, building buildings, all that jazz, all critically important. But the problem with school districts today is that we're expert at all of those other things, and we are not expert at our core competency, which is teaching and learning. And so I think we're recognizing that. I think that as I look out at states and districts, and now I get to travel to see a lot of what's happening across America in education, we are recognizing that we have to get great at developing people. We have to get great at professional learning. And I've spent the last year coaching aspiring superintendents and school leaders, consulting to school districts, to philanthropies, and to other folks. And what I see across the country is people grappling with this question: how do we develop and grow our teaching force, our leadership force, even our central office people, to be the best that they possibly can? And I'm bullish on this because I think when we set our minds to a particular problem, we figure out how to make it happen. When I think about the innovations that are happening in professional learning, I'm inspired. When I think about how people are trying to use technology in different ways to further professional learning, I'm inspired. As bad as it is that teachers are looking at Pinterest for lesson ideas, right? I'm also inspired that at least teachers recognize that other teachers are the answer. And so the creation of networks where teachers can interface and be in relationship with other teachers, that's going to be the thing that gets us the growth the quickest. And so, I've been out for a year, a little over a year. I've been running all around the country and all around the globe, looking at what people are doing to think about how to change education. Because when I left DCPS, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I've tried a bunch of different things. I've tried some work in higher education. I've tried some work in the technology space. I've tried some work in the innovation space. And at the end of the day, as I wrap up, I guess, about 15 months of exploration, I call it my adult gap year, I've come away very clear about how I want to spend the next phase of my life. I won't announce it now because we're making a big announcement in a couple of weeks, but I've decided to join an organization and lead some new work that I'm super, super excited about, and I want you to stay tuned for that announcement. But I will tell you the punchline of it, and that is that I will get to work with educators all across the country and all across the world to think about how we grow teachers, to think about how we develop people to be better educators, to think about how we utilize new ways, new methods, new technologies to think about growing educators. Because what I knew when I graduated from college, what I knew when I left the classroom, what I know as I've left DC Public Schools is our ability to transform the lives of the students that we love hinges on the people that we put in our classrooms and our ability to grow them. And so I want to say thank you to Learning Forward for giving me the opportunity to remind you that the work that you do is more important than any other work in education. You are the nexus between the people who are delivering amazing experiences for our young people and the growth that they need to be able to do that. And so while you may feel embattled, and while the federal government may be holding back funds, and while everything else might be happening, I'm here to tell you that the only way that DC public schools went from worst to first was because of amazing folks like you and professional growth opportunities as a result of relationships. So I hope that as you leave this conference, you leave it refreshed and energized. You leave it having connected with some people. You leave it with new ideas, but you leave it knowing that the work that you do is critical to the vision that we have for America's children. Thank you.